everybody. Welcome to the Bridge the Gap. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Bridge the Gap DFS podcast. Got another exciting guest today. Thank you for everybody that's been joining us all week with our content with the guys from SaberSim. Had Matt on Monday, had Danny yesterday. And our guest today is just top caliber with the other two. Very excited to introduce you guys to him, learn a little bit more about his story, and just dive deep like we did with the other two guests. So our guest today, without further ado, is Max Steinberg. Max, how's it going, buddy?
It's going well, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's really cool to get the opportunity to see these guys that you've seen over the years have success, and then just get the big reason I wanted to start this podcast is to get the peek behind the scenes of sites that I use and players that I followed. And so this is big fun for me. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No problem.
So tell us about, before we get into what's going on currently, tell us about yourself, where you got started, and just tell us a little bit about your journey that's brought you to this current point of where you're at.
Sure. So I started out as a professional poker player and played on the live tournament circuit and online poker professionally since I was about 19. I basically started as a professional when I got second place in this tournament in Costa Rica that was hosted by PokerStars, and started traveling after that, playing tournaments. And I sort of missed I didn't miss the poker boom, but I missed this sort of period of time in poker that was around from 2003 to 2006, where I was too young. I was, in 2006, I graduated high school, and there was this period of time that everyone in the poker industry talks about. It was so easy. It was like you basically could just read Harrington on Hold'em and make $50 an hour, and if you had any talent at all, you make a lot of money. And I sort of missed that. And so when later in my poker career, I thought to myself, and I would talk with my twin brother about it, that we didn't want to miss the next thing that was like that. And daily fantasy started popping up, and I think we actually were still a little late to the party, but I was living in Las Vegas, and I guess this was about 5 years ago, and my brother started telling me about daily fantasy, and we started both doing it separately and just talking strategy, and eventually my first year doing it, I just started doing really well, and I just thought, wow, this is awesome. This is really simple. It's not as much of a grind as poker. Grinding poker in Vegas, you basically are like going to the casino at 6 and leaving at 4 a.m. And that's just not the kind of lifestyle that I loved. And so eventually, when I was living in Vegas, I just switched to daily fantasy full time. And it was actually 3 months after that where I final tabled the World Series of Poker main event, and I ended up getting 4th place. And which is very ironic. But I ended up just sticking with daily fantasy. I liked it better and found it more interesting. It was more fun. I liked the 9 to 5 aspect of it, and eventually moved out to California and started doing it full time. And more recently, I've gotten into data science and computer programming, and have been developing my skills in that area. And now I live in California and have been sort of combining those two things with SabreSim.
So I want to just, before we get into some of the DFS stuff, I want to talk a little bit more about the poker opportunity. So
Sure.
So Danny, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to yesterday's podcast, but Danny told us the story of how for your 17th birthday, your dad made the deposit for you guys. And I think that's pretty cool to have parents that are just like, hey, you know what, be responsible, and we're going to support this. And, so talk to us a little bit more about, at age 19, what you decided to do is not what most typical, American teenagers are encouraged to do. So what was that like for the people around your life in order to, basically place that big bet on yourself and go all in on something like that?
Yeah. Well, my dad was certainly supportive when I was 17, but I don't think he thought that I was going to make it a career, and probably was hoping I'd go to business school or something. When I decided to drop out of college, my grandmother wrote me a scathing letter, like a handwritten letter, about how she was going to disown me if I dropped out of school. So I wouldn't exactly say that the people around me, aside from my friends who, they more have the attitude, can you help me do this? Can we all like do this? So I would say my family initially was kind of skeptical. I don't blame them, but once they started having more success, they eased up a bit, and as well as basically everyone in my family. And Danny and I's circle of friends, actually, a lot of professional poker players came out of that circle of friends, actually kind of partly in thanks to Danny and I helping people develop their skills.
I mean, that's... I did not hear that part of the story yesterday, so, right. Nobody ever wants to let down grandma, and...
Yeah. I know, it's tough. It was tough. But yeah, I mean, it feels like so long ago, so... Yeah.
So you get going on this poker journey. Talk to us about the trajectory of playing the game from when you started going to building up your confidence, because I think for a lot of DFS players that don't come from a poker background, that's something that they're trying to do as they become, a casual player to taking a little bit more serious. So if you can remember, talk to us a little bit more about as you're playing, when you start to move from curiosity to putting in a lot of work to building up that confidence to being like, hey, you know what, I'm actually one of the top players in the world, and then hitting the felt like you did.
Yeah, I think I always I was in high school. So when I was in high school, I wasn't putting that much work in. And then when I went to college, I started putting in more. And then obviously when I dropped out, it was my full-time job. But I think I was always motivated to learn and get better. I never felt like I knew everything. And I always wanted to try to figure more out. And so, but that being said, I had a good foundation just because I could play casually in high school and was researching and studying and like posting on online poker forums. I mean, there's things like online communities, just like there are now for daily fantasy, where, I'd post, I'd get feedback, I'd read about hand history. So I was always just looking to get better. And, it's interesting. Daily fantasy is so much different than with poker, because with poker starting out, the resources were you'd read a book, you'd read like Harrington on Hold'em or some 2+2 book, or you'd go on an online poker forum. Now you have people, they make videos, they'll actually just tell you who they're picking. So it's sort of an interesting, different type of learning curve. And I think that's the benefit of daily fantasy versus poker, is you can learn by just like seeing why people are picking certain people. Whereas in poker, you can't just watch someone play and then play like them. It's not that straightforward. Things that might seem intuitive are not once you're in the position where you actually have to play the hand. So it's sort of interesting for me how that differs. But yeah, I mean, with poker, it was just, you had to dig deep to find the good resources. And then eventually when there would be, these sites that would make coaching videos came out, and it became easier to learn, and there's a lot more resources to learn. But back when I was starting, it was basically talking with my brother, posting on poker forums, and just playing and trying to figure the game out.
Now, one of the things that you've mentioned twice already is your relationship with your brother, and I want to talk more about that. And yesterday I was joking around that the relationship that you guys have, to have a twin brother as interested in both of these things, it's like the ultimate like life cheat code at attacking both of these things. So can you talk a little bit more about, how instrumental your relationship has gone in keeping each other sharp and pushing each other and motivating each other and just bouncing ideas off each other?
Yeah, I think obviously it's really helpful. I think in multiple ways. One, I think it's just more fun to be, with daily fantasy. It's like I have like a partner to learn with, and someone that you can bounce ideas off of and can share things that he's learned, and I can share things that I've learned. I think it helps the learning curve a lot. And then I think there's also what comes to mind is a big motivation factor.
Sure.
My twin brother learned computer programming before I did. We all sort of, he tried to get me to learn, and he was taking online courses. And I kind of just got frustrated with it and stopped. He didn't. And so eventually he was able to do this data analysis that I wasn't able to do. And I had to sort of rely on him. And, I'd be like, I think this. And he'd be like, well, I just looked at the data and that's not true. And I get frustrated. And I'd say, no, that you must be doing it wrong or something. But I had no way of doing it. And I think that helped motivate me to be like, okay, I actually need to learn this. Otherwise, I can't do the things that my brother is doing, which is really good, smart stuff. So I think that actually motivated me in a way that was really helpful to push me to learn computer science and programming. And so I can actually get to a point now where I can contribute to a website like SaberSim instead of just making daily fantasy lineups or sports bets in order to make money.
Sure. Now, talk to us a little bit more about the getting involved with a site like SaberSim. Danny touched on it yesterday, but I want to hear your side of how you came across the site and got involved, got behind the scenes, and now pushing it to new limits.
Yeah, so Danny touched on it a lot. I actually heard of it from Danny because he was reading about it. He read about how Matt created the simulator, and we sort of just both kept an eye on it. And then, he kind of led the way in terms of thinking about investing in it. Actually, in the past year, so I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I decided at the beginning of last year that I wanted to look for a data science job because they're very well paying. It's like I just thought I wanted to move to a different stage of my career and maybe not play a game for a living like poker or daily fantasy or something like that. And so I started looking for a job, and I had a few interviews and I got quite far. I interviewed at a couple of really interesting companies, and during one of those times I was interviewing for this company that I think is actually a brilliant idea. And they're very successful at the moment, but basically they go to young baseball players and they try to get them to like trade career earnings with each other. So like, let's say you're a pitcher in single A baseball and I'm a pitcher in double A baseball and we're both lefties and we throw hard. They might say, hey, we have a machine learning model and it seems like both you guys have similar potentials. Would you be interested in like trading 10% of your future career earnings with each other? So, if one of you signs a big contract, you're giving 10% to the other person. And so I'm interviewing at this company, and while this is going on, this takes like a couple months, Danny is suddenly saying, hey, me and a couple other people were looking to invest in this company. Were you interested? And I have this conflict of interest because I'm talking to the owner of this company. It's called Pando Pooling, about investing in this company. He said, I honestly think this might be a conflict of interest. And so he said, okay. And so luckily, Danny and a couple of the other investors let me basically like have a buy-in period that I could choose to invest. And I ended up not getting that job. And I ended up saying, okay, hey, I can invest in this company and I can be a data scientist for SaberSim.
Wow.
And that will end up, basically, it actually ended up working out great because I'm invested in a company that I'm working for. I'm doing the work that I want to do. And I get to spend a year learning more on my own time as well, or more than a year, as long as it takes, basically. So
that worked out pretty well. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So what about your new role within SaberSim? What are you noticing in terms of the development of your DFS game? How has it helped? What are you seeing or looking at and doing things a little bit differently that have opened your eyes up with your work behind the scenes?
So I would say two things. One is I think that what SaberSim already does is something that I intuitively have tried to do throughout my daily fantasy career. With both projections and the lineup base, work off a good projection system, have lineups that bank off of upside, off of correlation, off of ownership, like fading at the right times, like picking the high upside plays, and so on and so forth. But it was mostly me trying to intuit that, and
Okay.
so I think what just with the new stuff that we've developed and mostly Matt has developed, I think I'm just now am just actually taking a more quantitative approach to doing those things.
Okay.
And I think the other thing is the inner workings is just how complex the models actually are. I was really shocked. I think Matt talked about this. There's been a couple times where we've literally just gone through his entire model with him, and I was expecting, okay, I'm going to find some things that we could really change, and the reality was, me and my brother didn't find many things at all. There's like a few things here or there that we could see down the line, but I was pretty shocked at just how good the models that he had created already were. But yeah, I think in general, I'm honestly, when I invested, I didn't know what the inner workings were, and I'm pretty impressed. And that's not just like a blowing smoke type of thing. Sure. I just am. And I think Danny, I was listening to his interview a little bit the other day, and I think I agree with him. Is one of the reasons that I invested in it is just I think the product's really good. And now I'm not sure if I totally answered what your question was. So if I didn't totally answer it, please keep going.
Yeah, no, that was perfect, because you had mentioned, moving for more of a quantitative approach versus, just making assumptions and moving forward. And I think that's so important for, getting better at this game. When you're going back and you're talking about, you would say something to Danny and he said, no, the data actually proves otherwise. That's very challenging for, especially us guys, and we love sports and we watch a ton of sports. Like, everybody knows everything about sports, the most, and it's very hard to check your ego, and it's something that you definitely have to do to get better at this game. So I just want to talk a little bit more about, we hear quite a bit of the mental game in poker. It's not really talked about that much in DFS, but can you talk a little bit more, talk to us a little bit about, how mental game helped you in poker, and, how that helps you to stay standard and balanced when, you have, especially with the sport like baseball, and now we're going to see with football, all kinds of variants.
Yeah, I think the difference between poker and daily fantasy mental game is a little different, because in poker, all your decisions have to be made in real time. And, if you have a bad hand, you can't just leave a tournament and cool down or something. With daily fantasy, you make your picks, you have a bad day, but you have a day to recover. So I would say actually, it's like a different, daily fantasy is a different kind of mental game. It's not like in the moment trying to be zen in the moment, because in poker you have to really be zen in the moment. But in daily fantasy, the mental game is it's more overconfidence I'm sure is a huge issue for everyone, is learning from your mistakes, recognizing what a mistake is and what a mistake isn't, and having a good process and things like that. It's just a different kind of mental game.
Now, what are you doing to be able to, keep that focus sharp? When you just mentioned overconfidence, the other side of that is tilt, and when we're running good, we feel like we're never going to lose again. And when we're losing, we feel like we're never going to win again. And why do we subject ourselves to that? So talk to us a little bit more about how, regardless of the results, you're staying in the pocket and making sure that you're putting whatever happened behind you, good or bad, and moving forward to the next day, to the next slate.
Yeah, I think my brother also was well said in this. Is I think the best way is just to work on something and work on something that's more of daily fantasy development, and not, it's researching, it's bankroll management, it's doing some data analysis, creating machine learning model, doing things that are going to help you win in the future. I find when I do that, I feel the bad feelings of losing or the bad feelings of a bad run go away, because now I'm excited of applying this new knowledge to my game and doing better from it.
Now, you just also mentioned a topic that's very near and dear to my heart is bankroll management. There's not a lot of good resources in the daily fantasy sports space. I tried to come up with something. I reverse engineered something from poker. I don't know how good it is. It works for me. So can you talk a little bit more about your bankroll management philosophy? Because I know that's a big thing that a lot of players struggle with, either how much to play, what contests to play in, putting too much into play, doing well, and then the overconfidence, they shove off more of their bankroll in the tournament and they lose and they're back at square one. So right. Can you help our casual players just work that out mentally with a bankroll management approach for a beginner, so to speak?
Yeah, I actually think the best bankroll management in daily fantasy is actually tournament management. Cool. And it's choosing the right tournaments to play and also knowing how many multi-entries you actually want to do, like when you're starting to have so many diminishing returns that you're risking losing. I think a lot of people think, oh, if I put 150 lineups into the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings, I'm going to win sometime. Like, it's just the law of large numbers, or I don't know what they're thinking. But the reality is I think the worst bankroll management mistakes you make is thinking that just looking at the maximum number of entries that a tournament will take and going to that maximum. I know that might not be true for amateurs, but sometimes, or not amateurs, but new players who are recreational players is, sometimes making one really good lineup is going to be a lot better than making 20 mediocre ones, especially when your results have not dictated that that's the profitable strategy for you. I'm not as concerned about, having X amount of money and making sure you're risking that amount of money every day, even though that's a good practice. I think as long as you're doing something that the entries that you're entering in, you're sure, or maybe not sure, you're pretty certain that they're profitable entries. And if you're not, like, risking very little, that's going to be the best type of bankroll management you can do, I think.
I want to go back to something that you just mentioned about maxing out tournaments, because I think that as we play this game, especially for us lower stakes, micro stakes guys, the fear of missing out is something that's always in the back of our head, whether that's a chalkier play or, hey, this is the popular contrarian play, or, with this backup running back, you got to lock him in. But I think another thing that we struggle with is, hey, I got to max this out. And, we're losing equity when we don't max it out. So you're one of the first people I've ever say, hey, you know what, if it doesn't call for maxing it out, don't max it out. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think you have to gauge how does the slate, like, how much edge do I have in the slate? It's, sometimes there's certain players that you're going to play and you think, okay, wow, it doesn't seem like the field is on these particular players. And this is going to happen throughout the football season, that you're going to look at ownership projections and you're going to say, oh, this guy's projected at 5% ownership. He's my favorite value running back. And when that's the case, if you're right, and hopefully you are, but if you're at least using the right logic, you might have a lot of edge on that day or that week. And conversely, let's say there's just a guy who's really mispriced. You're going to play him. Everyone else is going to play him. That might not be, or that almost certainly is not going to be as high edge of a day for you. And I think actually examining that and looking at how your plays compare to the projected ownership of the slate, and seeing how much different you're actually going to be than other people is a helpful tool to see, okay, how profitable of a day is this going to be for me? And if it seems like, it's Friday and it's NFL and you're just using all the players everyone else is on Twitter talking about, then maybe it's a 20 entry week for the Millionaire Maker instead of a 100 entry week or 150 entry week, or a 20 entry week in the small stakes tournament, the $3 or the slant or something like that. even with these 20 entry max tournaments, it's not just max them out, because although I would say with low stakes 20 entry max tournaments, I would hope that if you're smart enough, you probably most weeks are going to be profitable. But I think just thinking about how much different are the players I'm playing than the field is going to help you think about how profitable is my 50th entry into this tournament going to be? How profitable is the 70th entry? How profitable is my 150th entry? How many entries should I actually be doing? I think that's really important.
And I like what you said about that, because, one of the things that you just touched on is, being able to look at as you're building to see, hey, is what I'm building looking similar to what everyone else is talking about? And I don't think that a lot of players that are casually playing or trying to get better are thinking that way. I think whatever they see on Twitter, that's what they want to do. And so talk to us a little bit about when that transitioned for you mentally to start looking at, you get into DFS, and I know we're backtracking a little bit, but you get into DFS. So when did it start to click to you about, hey, thinking for myself, being different, not worrying about what these quote unquote experts are telling me to do, but more just constructing good lineups?
Yeah, I would say more, back when I first started, I didn't have to think about these things. The money was easier. You would play a head to head and someone would play an injured player. And sadly, it's not like that anymore. Most people play lineups that are pretty logical. You rarely run into someone who's just being a complete idiot. And so as the games get tougher, I think you have to just be more resourceful in the ways you're finding an edge or conserving losses or saving. You just have to look at things at every angle possible. Otherwise, if you get too lazy, then you might end up one day realizing, oh, wait, I'm actually losing money. And that's the worst thing you can do, is when you've wasted months not realizing that you're losing money and you actually were losing money.
And how much of, from your poker background to your DFS background in terms of tracking results, how important is that to learning from that? Because that is one of the mistakes that I see quite a few people. They'll ask me for advice or something, and I'm like, well, what does your sample size say? Or how are you doing in this type of tournament? They're like, I don't know, dude. And it's like, well, my opinion doesn't really matter, because if your data's going to tell us the story.
Yeah, I think, tracking results is a really good reality check, and it's a really good way of figuring out where you might be losing money pointlessly. But yeah, I think you just have to, my just main point is just take everything into account you possibly can, because, if you want to, I don't think making money at daily fantasy is terribly difficult, but it's difficult if you're not willing to hold yourself accountable for all the things. And I think bankroll management is one. I think tracking your tournaments is always a great idea. Being realistic about what tournaments you're actually profitable in and what you're not, whether your line of construction, you seem to favor cash games or tournaments, like things like that. You always need to be considering that and making sure that you're not overlooking something that could be an easy fix that could help you win more.
When you say some of the easy fixes, are you seeing something that, as we're heading into football season, that you're noticing in your data from last year that's going to help you to approach the game differently? Or are you just, hey, I've got 6 weeks of baseball left, I'm eye on the prize? That tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you're working on right now from where you were at this time last year.
Sure. So I think one thing is the great part about working at SaberSim is I can work on something that if it helps improve the simulation, it's going to help us. And sometimes it's not directly related to fantasy, but it is when applied to a simulation. Something I worked on recently that we're about to implement into the model is something that feels really innocuous, but is a machine learning model that predicts the length of time between plays. And what I mean by that, like real game time. So let's say the Patriots run a rushing play. it goes for 5 yards. From the start of that play to the start of the next play, how many game seconds are going off the clock? And that sounds kind of like simple and maybe a little boring. I actually didn't find it boring for a few reasons, but basically, when we have that exactitude with how much time is actually coming off different plays, like you're going to have a way more exact simulation, and that's going to help things like, game stacking, I think, is really a popular thing in NFL. The past couple of years in DFS NFL is people just think, okay, I'm just going to stack this game. And there's some correlation to be had there. And I think when you have a really accurate simulation, especially with the time stuff, you're going to have much more accurate correlations with things like game stacking. And it's going to help. It's something that seems sort of simple, but it actually will help our daily fantasy model, I think, significantly. It actually helped me. It was really interesting because something I learned from the model is the idea of pace of play is actually not what people think it is. People think of pace of play and they think the Arizona Cardinals are going to get up to the line of scrimmage really quickly, which is actually true. Or some teams run no huddle and some teams don't. And I actually found that that's actually is mostly not the reason a team plays fast. Some teams obviously do that faster, and one of which is the New England Patriots is one of those teams that actually plays pretty fast, I discovered. But mostly the reason a team plays fast or slow has to do with their approach to the game. Is, do they pass the ball a lot? Do they pass the ball downfield a lot? And those downfield passes, are they do they have more boom or bust plays? It's mostly about gaining a lot of yards at once or having the clock be stopped when you don't. And so that's something really interesting that I didn't realize before until I actually built this model and realized that most of pace of play is just accounted for by other factors aside from how quickly you get up to the line of scrimmage.
So I would think that just trying to deduct what you just talked about, I would think that.
Yeah, sorry, that was a lot of
No. But that's the thing is if you can explain it in a way that makes sense to me, then I can see how that leads to instant improvement. And you're talking about, hey, this is probably boring to other people, but I got fascinated by it. So I'm just thinking about, hey, if we're really striving for accuracy on these simulations, and we know that on average, hey, after a running game, they're going to let some clock run, what that would help us determine is the actual number of plays that are going to get ran, which would result in more accurate simulations. Is that right?
Right, exactly. It's mostly how many plays are going to be run between the teams, like how much time, because obviously in an NFL game there's 60 minutes. So if you can get accurately when a team is sort of shaving 2 minutes off of the clock because of the way they play, and another team's shaving 2 minutes off the clock because of the way they play, then that's an extra 4 minutes of plays that is going to boost up the score. And you see it with some of these games that are quote unquote shootouts where, it gets 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter and this team goes down the field really quickly and then this team goes down the field really quickly. And there's like 4 or 5 extra drives in a matter of 5 minutes that our simulator is going to be able to capture really well because we're actually modeling how time goes off the clock in a very accurate way.
And that just blows my mind because, we talked about with Matt and Danny about how, we're not really concerned about projections as much as we want accurate simulations. And that's a paradigm shifting for a lot of us players. And so I just look at something like that. And, with football being very, very projection based, I'll see some of the other sites' projections and they'll have somebody projected for a certain number of points. And I just want to be like, based off of what, and why are you so sure? And why are we going to take a stand on that guy? And if that wide receiver ends up in, 50% of my lineups and catches 2 passes, like I'm cooked.
Right.
So that can be very frustrating, especially when right now there's a lot of sites that are just clamoring for our money. Hey, sign up here, do this, look at what we won last year. And it's just like so noisy, and to get a chance to just pick your guys' brains about this. I mean, if what we're going to see here as soon as it gets released, we're actually able to execute on everything that you guys have been talking about, I just think that it's going to be such a powerful tool that it's like, I love telling people about you guys, but I hope they don't find out, lose that edge, you know?
Right. Yeah, that's very nice of you. I think, and we're not going to be always accurate, right? It's, NFL, I mean, obviously baseball is the most random game, but NFL's a pretty random game too. So, sometimes you're going to have a wide receiver and you project him for 17 DraftKings points and he gets 2. And was that projection wrong? I'm not sure. It might have been, it might not have been. But I think what I find when I'm making lineups with SaberSim is basically we're accounting for all the things that you want to account for. And what ends up happening is suddenly, one night, it's not like playing guaranteed prize pool tournaments in DFS is you just win every time. It's a lot of, the graph is sort of like sideways, down, up, sideways, down, up. And what I find is, if you're building the lineups the right way, eventually, like magically, there's just one night where you're in the top 3, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess these lineups are being built correctly because this is what I'm going for. And I think it's not more about just like getting the projection right every time. It's just about making it so you're going to actually win a tournament when the things go right, instead of optimizing for you to get 20th in a tournament when the things go right. Because especially in a tournament like the Millionaire Maker, that's actually, you're going to lose money going for 20th. The way you're going to make money in the Millionaire Maker is going for first. So if you're not optimizing your lineups and building your lineups in that way that's going to maximize your chances of getting first, you're just throwing money away.
So what you just touched on is something that I think a lot of players struggle with. Talk to us a little bit more about, because when you just said optimizing, and I think that's the correct approach, but I think when players look at something like the Millionaire Maker and they'll look at a week and there's like a 5% wide receiver, 4%, 2%, whatever, and they see that and they see, oh, this person was just different, so I need to be different. And all of a sudden, you're trying too hard to be different, and optimization is completely in the other direction. Can you just walk back about what some of the things you'd be thinking about to help them look at it in terms of optimization versus being different and contrarian?
Right. Well, so I used to actually look at every week. I'd make a video looking at the Millionaire Maker lineups every week, and what I seem to have found was, there's certain things like it seemed like a lot of the time, regardless of matchup, having a really skilled QB would be helpful. Like these guys like Ryan Tannehill and Eli Manning were not winning these tournaments. Having a low priced wide receiver that had high upside seemed to help a lot too. Like I was looking for patterns, and so that was really helpful when I'd look for these patterns, and I honestly forget what some of them are because I actually, I don't really think about it anymore. I just, SaberSim accounts for the upside because they're simulating the game. So, I think if you're just creating lineups on your own, like I'll help the people who are listening who are doing that, which is you have to find players who are high upside no matter what. Like you can't go cheap on a guy who isn't going to score. It doesn't have a chance to score a lot of points. And also you can't, and you have to make sure that your lineups are correlated in the right way. But now I actually don't really have to think about that anymore because I can just use Saber and it'll do it. But what I get to think about is how can we make our upside projections more accurate? How can we make the simulations more accurate? And if I do that, then I'll just be able to optimize for these things better.
Now, when you're putting together your lineups on SaberSim, how much so this is a two-parted question, is how much of it is tinkering with beforehand and how much of it is tinkering after the fact? Because I think when we look at how many simulations can get ran, one of the questions I get quite frequently is, well, how do I just assume that this is the lineup that I'm going to be getting? If this lineup's coming in, how do I know that this is the best lineup? So talk us a little bit more about your SaberSim process from prior to your build, after your build, and just some overall tips for some people that are getting acclimated to, because this is paradigm shifting for a lot of us players. So,
Right.
you guys are on the scenes and hands-on and know it like the back of your hand. But for some of us, this is vastly different than anything we've ever done before.
Right. So I would say I actually would add a third step. So
Okay.
I would say there's adjusting things before building a lineup. And then there's building lineups that I would call test builds.
Okay.
And then there would be, and I'll elaborate on that in a second, and then there's the final build. So my process sort of is I make adjustments on projection or ownership based on different advanced statistics I'm looking at and different feel for ownership that might be different than what SaberSim has. And then I create my lineups. And once I create the lineups, I look at what's being created and I say, does this intuitively seem maybe not correct, but what's going on? And I'm sort of just like, what's the word for it? Quality controlling.
Okay.
So I see the lineups and I go, okay, here's the lineups. Who am I getting a lot? Let me double check if this makes sense. So I look at who I'm getting a lot, and then I go back and I say, okay, do I agree with this projection? Do I agree with this ownership projection? And if I agree with those, then I go, okay, I trust that the builder, given that it has the right projection, the right ownership projection, or at least close to it, I'm just going to trust what it says. But maybe I look at it and I go, oh, you know what? I don't really love this Michael Thomas projection or something. I think the Saints are going to score less than people think, and maybe I'll lower Thomas and I'll lower Drew Brees and I'll run it again because I'm getting him 70%. And I then notice from that his projection's too high. But I never do something where I have my projections set with the way I like them, and I have my ownership set the way I like it, and then adjust anything after that. Actually, I think Saber has a lot of there's some exceptions. Saber has a lot of tools to do that really easily, and usually when I'm doing that, it's more of a lineup construction type of thing. It's, in baseball, sometimes I really like the stacks that are, pairs where where you're using a bunch of players that are in pairs on different teams. Just because the lineup construction is different and we're not optimizing for lineup construction differentiation. Like in baseball, everyone does like 2-4 stacks or a 5 and a 3 stack. And so that's something we're just not going to account for. So it'll be little things like that, but it's never going to be something like, okay, I'm getting, Todd Gurley 60% of the time. I don't want him 60% of the time. I'm going to make it 50% of the time. That I would never do that. I don't think that makes sense. And I think when you do something like that, you're basically not actually you're not actually using the best lineups. You're just sacrificing expected value because something feels wrong, but you should be able to back up what feels wrong with inaccuracy in one of our numbers. And if that's not happening, then I just don't do it. I just don't make that adjustment.
So you just mentioned, you like the side-by-sides in baseball, and going back to like your Michael Thomas, let's just stay with the Saints. So when you're doing your quality control, and let's say you did like the Saints that day and it's all Brees, it's all Thomas, are you at all concerned about not getting some of the secondary guys, or are you just not too concerned with that? Because I know that, when we sacrifice optimization, and I like to call it having the butterfly effect on your build. Talk to us a little bit more about, if this game does shoot out, and it's not Thomas, I don't want to be left wide open, or are you comfortable just taking that stand and not worrying about the secondary guys?
Well, so I don't do this during baseball, but I do this during football, where I do have a list of guys that I like for a particular reason and might be a little more liberal boosting their projection in order to get them. And so I sometimes will raise, just be like, I want to get this guy 5%. Maybe this doesn't make sense, but whatever type of thing, because the difference between that's not going to affect my lineups that much. But, usually I'm willing to take a stand on my key guys. But I think in general, I don't mind doing something where I'm peppering in guys that I like. But again, if I adjust someone up and I'm a little liberal with it and the lineup builder's still not getting him, I'm not going to force him in. But if I get someone 2% after doing that, I might boost him to 4% because, hey, let's get him 4% of the time. But I'm not going to just force someone in that isn't naturally getting in with the builder via raising a projection or messing with ownership in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And that's interesting because I think that that's the temptation of, when you start doing some manual adjustments of, hey, I really want to see this guy in my lineup, and then you bump him and you don't see him, and then you bump him again and keep bumping and keep bumping. So I really like what you said about like, hey, like I'm willing to give this guy a shot to get bumped in here, but if he's not, I'm going to wash my hands of it and just trust, all of the back end work that we put in.
Yeah, I think that is what we're talking about with overconfidence, right? It's some people are overconfident. They go, this projection system that is pretty accurate is just way wrong. I just know this guy's going to do well. And you actually just can't know that with anyone. The only exception maybe being a running back who you're just certain is just going to be in on like every down and catches. The guys that you can just feel very confident in because their opportunity is just so great. But that's usually pretty rare. And that's almost never happens with a wide receiver. So don't even think about it there.
Well, yeah, wide receivers are very, I would say the highest in variance of the NFL positions.
Or a tight end.
Yeah,
I always
right.
get in trouble because I go, this is where I get in trouble in NFL season. I go, man, this $3,000 tight end, he's the next Travis Kelce. Like, I just know it. He got 7 targets last week, and then he just duds. And I'm like, well, that was really stupid. And then I do it again the next week, and I just am. And I think that's my commitment this year is don't overrate a low price tight end who has it doesn't work.
Hey, you were talking to the president of the Cameron Brate fan club. Like because like last year when they were swapping between Fitzpatrick and Jameis, Brate would just be virtually unignored, and everybody wants to play with the new toy and OJ Howard. So I commiserate with you because it feels, I know it can be very optimal to pay up at tight end, especially, week 1 pricing comes out. So there's some soft opportunities to take advantage of. And, it's so much sexier to pay down at tight end and be on that guy to get that upside elsewhere. So that is definitely a temptation that I struggle with I'm going to try to do that as well. Now, one of the other things that I think with is along the lines of overconfidence is, there's so many buzzwords in the fantasy community, and one of them is lock. I'm going to lock this guy. This guy's a lock. And can you just talk a little bit more about if you're going to take a stand to just trust and be more organic in it? Because I'll see sometimes with people struggling with something, and it's like, dude, like I'm dumb. Like the only reason I'm good at this game is because I'm dumb. Like there's so many people much smarter at me doing this, and I just delegate the hard work to them.
Yeah, I think, again, we're talking about sort of a heuristic approach to daily fantasy, which I think, I think my brother said this well, is taking a mathematical approach is going to beat a heuristic approach every time. And you can have these heuristics like, I'm just going to press the lock button on the lineup builder on this site. And, I'm just going to get them 100%. And, I just know. And, there's some guys who are quote unquote locks, but they'll be locks because you're just naturally getting them with their pretty accurate projection, pretty accurate ownership projection. Um, and you can help create that projection, but a lock should be something that you know our a lineup builder, and specifically I think ours probably will do this best, is just going to organically get. But I think in general, if we're talking about heuristics, and it's funny, this is how I had to think about it 3 years ago. Is you had to think there weren't many choices with lineup builders, so you had to be, you just had to force a quarterback stack with a receiver. You just had to make sure that your lineups had game stacks. You had to literally press the lock button to get a guy you wanted, most of the time. And so I think in general, if we're just talking about that, you probably almost never want to lock a wide receiver, and you probably almost never want to lock a quarterback, but you might lock a running back. And you almost certainly do not want to lock a defense. I think that's like throwing money away. That doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, I think usually in the season, talking about lock plays, the lock plays I'm going to find are probably going to be running backs. And if I'm feeling particularly insane, I might lock a wide receiver, but it's usually because that wide receiver I think is going to be so low owned, and I think he's so viable that I'm just kind of going ham and saying, look, I'm just going to, if this guy does well, I'm so leveraged, and I think he has a good chance, then I'll do that. And also I just love being contrarian. But yeah, usually I don't think this idea of locking people usually is not smart, with the exception of some weeks with a running back. But I think, again, you have to make sure that it's actually happening because the running back, is going to be low owned, or maybe not low owned, but at least he has high enough upside and makes sense, and it makes sense with your lineups, is correlated in the right ways. And yeah, I think pressing the lock button sometimes is kind of foolish, or just, I don't know how many people still hand make lineups, but if you're hand making lineups, like just putting someone in 100% of the time, I just don't know if that's smart.
And I think it's, there's a lot of ego, especially with football season. It's the most popular sport, and everybody thinks that what they saw on TV, it means that they're the most educated, and throw the data out the window. And we're just not going to be smart going about that. And, just like your brother yesterday, I could go on for hours. We're about out of time, and I just, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. But before we let you go, maybe just talk about some of the things that you're excited about with SaberSim, where we can find you, and just plug everything that you got going on.
Yeah. Well, actually, first of all, I just want to mention this is I used to hand make 50 lineups on Sunday morning. And I'd literally have a spreadsheet. And I'd be like, okay, make 5 lineups with this quarterback receiver pairing, make 5 lineups with this. And literally hours before, because you couldn't edit lineups. So you just had to make sure you had all the news. And it was just, oh man, good memories. Anyway, what I'm excited about. I think our football model is going to be very good this year, and I'm excited because I think our lineup builder is already so excellent. So to have that baseline of having a good, very good model with it, I think is going to help quite a bit. And especially because with SabreSim, to use it the best, you actually don't want to make too many adjustments, because you want to work off the upsides that we already have in place. And obviously we allow you to make adjustments, and that's going to help. But if you're adjusting just little bits here and there, it's going to really work in the way that you want it to work. So I think I'm really excited about our new projections, which I think are going to be released soon. And I think they're going to fit into the builder really well. I'm also excited to, one thing that's a benefit of working at a company is we have a lot of budget for getting data. So I have a lot better data to work with that I've been working with recently in really fun ways. I'm working on something that is going to be an expected fantasy points model that I think will hopefully help us make projections and hopefully help us with the projections, and I think will be really cool. So just working with really good data and actually having like charting data and things like that. Yeah, so and just continuing to help improve. I mean, this is my first year working with SaberSim, so it's exciting to see how I can, in what ways I can help make the model better, or what ways I can make the simulation better. And I'm sure throughout the seasons, there will be more and more ways that I'll do that. Where you can find me is on Twitter at Max Steinberg. You can also find me in the SaberSim Slack on occasion, and you can also find me in Alameda, California as well, if you live around there. Maybe walking my dog around town. So those are the places for sure. And a couple poker rooms in the Bay Area, I'm sure.
Well, Max, thank you again. I really appreciate it. I feel like every time we dive into these types of conversations, especially this week, I learn a ton. I'm feeling very empowered, very excited about what you guys are rolling out, and I already know what direction I want to go week one, and I just can't wait to just get in and start tinkering and seeing where we land and make some money this first week of the season. I appreciate you.
Cool, no problem.
Yeah, so thank you guys, everybody that tuned in. You can download it at any of the podcast platforms. It's go live on Twitch right away, and we'll get it up to YouTube as soon as possible. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll catch you guys the next time. God bless. Have a great weekend.